House Bill 2066, Mr. Speaker, Committee on Appropriations under consideration. House Bill 2066, I recommend that this bill amended to do pass. Mr. Speaker, Committee on Rules and consideration. House Bill 2066 says bill is constitutional, proper, and form.
Chair recognizes Representative Leach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that when a committee of the whole rise report, it recommends that House Bill 2066 receive a due pass.
Okay, and there's a floor amendment to the bill. Representative Leach.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the floor amendment to HB 2066 in my name be adopted.
Okay, any discussion or any explanation?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, just very briefly, we went back in and cleared up some language that needed to be cleared up that I didn't catch in the initial get-go, so we caught it just before we went to the floor, and so I would urge everyone's support.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? Members, you've heard the motion for the floor amendment. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Appears the ayes have it, do have it, so ordered. Mr. Leach, your bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rise a report, it recommends that HB 2066 as amended receive a due pass.
Okay, the chair recognizes Representative Powers Hanley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Chair, sorry. I rise to ask if Representative Leach will answer a question.
I yield.
Madam Leach, do you yield? Okay. She yields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Leach. I read the bill and I read the amendment, and it says that you're going to you propose to use some of the medical marijuana card funds to do education regarding the dangers of medical marijuana. And I was wondering if you could tell me, what are the dangers of medical marijuana?
Representative Leach.
If you go to the source that everybody goes to, that's all good and right, just Google it. I would encourage you to do that, or Arizona's for Responsible Drug Policy. You will see numbers and numbers and numbers of cases that will give you exactly what you're looking for, and probably more numbers than you really care to. We have a growing epidemic in our country that is bestowed on us. We're fighting it every day, and it's starting at an ever younger age. And this funds that we have needed to be this funds that we have need to be used to explore all avenues to make sure that our young folks do not become addicted to this illegal drug.
Representative Powers Hanley.
Yes. May I make a comment?
Yes, please proceed.
Well, first of all, medical marijuana is legal in Arizona. And I would also like to say that I used to teach health education at the University of Arizona and at Pima Community College. And in my class was a section on addiction and drugs. And we went through everything in a health education kind of way, teaching the facts. And of all the drugs that we're talking about, including alcohol and tobacco and methamphetamines and ecstasy and designer drugs and the only one that never killed anybody was marijuana. So thank you.
Okay. Representative Thorpe. Chair recognizes Representative Thorpe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment on the bill.
Yes, please proceed.
I support the bill, and a web page that I found really fascinating was the American Lung Association. They have a terrific web page on marijuana. And so the way most people smoke marijuana is unfiltered. So they end up with about 6 times more tar in their lungs than they do when they smoke a cigarette. The page that the American Lung Association has talks about all the different respiratory diseases associated, especially with people who smoke marijuana on a regular basis. What I find very confusing is for years, 20, 30 years, we've had this national campaign to try to stop people from smoking cigarettes and tobacco products. We've had billion-dollar lawsuits and settlements to try to get people to stop smoking tobacco products. And now, in this state, we've now legalized recreational marijuana, where somebody who claims that they have an illness is now lighting something on fire the same way you light a tobacco product on fire and inhale it, and it does do damage to the respiratory system. And especially it's been shown that children, juveniles that smoke marijuana have cognitive disorders. So I support what Representative Leach is doing here, and I know that we will see the day when somebody comes back and sues the state of Arizona for millions of dollars because they now have emphysema because we allowed them to smoke marijuana while the federal government said it was legal. So I do support this bill. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fighting
Representative Lawrence, you
recreational...
wish to make a comment, I'm assuming?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Proceed.
In fighting recreational marijuana, I spent time with legislators from Colorado. Those legislators advised me that there have been deaths, children who have eaten gummy bears, marijuana, children who have eaten candy bars, marijuana. So there have been deaths involved with marijuana among children. There are further proofs, Mr. Chairman, but I will just question those who have said there are no deaths as caused by marijuana. There are.
Chair recognizes Representative Fincham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to rise in support of Representative Leach's bill.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hate to give away my age, but I guess you can probably tell I'm fairly close to Representative Leach. I remember the day in black and white television when there were doctors who were on TV extolling the virtues of smoking cigarettes. What's interesting to me is now we are apparently in the same mode. We've just changed the product. So I think it has been, we've done yeoman's work on trying to convince kids not to buy that pack of Marlboro Reds, roll it up in their sleeve, and look cool smoking. What I also find interesting is that the Hollywood set has now all of a sudden decided that smoking's okay again, in spite of the fact that lung cancer and the connection between tobacco and smoke and lung cancer has been made very clear. So I can't help but wonder what's going to happen 20 years from now when we see a direct link between smoking of other substances, not just tobacco, and the spike in cancers and lung disease, emphysema. The lungs were not made to take in particulate matter in the form of smoke. They were intended to take in air. With that, I am happy to support Mr. Leach's bill.
Chair recognizes Representative Powers-Hanley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise to ask if Representative Lawrence will answer a question.
Representative Lawrence, do you yield?
Mr. Chairman, I don't yield.
He does not yield.
I rise to ask if Representative Thorpe will yield to a question.
Representative Thorpe, do you yield?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I have anything else to add to this, so I'll refrain at this time. But thank you anyway.
He does not yield.
Okay, I rise to ask Dr. Freeze if he will yield to a question.
Representative Freeze, do you yield?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
He yields.
So, Dr. Freeze, sometime in the last year or so, I believe that there was an article, it was a guest commentary in the Arizona Republic talking about deaths from gummy bears and cookies and things that Representative Lawrence was referring to. Do you remember the statement that ADHS Director Dr. Cara Christ issued after that article appeared in this Arizona Republic?
Representative Freeze.
Mr. Chair, Representative Powers Hanley, I'm struggling to remember exactly, but I think that it would probably be a very that death is unlikely from ingesting marijuana.
Representative Powers Hanley.
Well, actually, Dr. Cara Christ said that nobody in Arizona has died from marijuana, and that was her statement after that article appeared in the Republic. Thank you.
Okay, the chair recognizes Representative Freeze.
Mr. Chair, yes, I would like to know if Mr. Leach would take a question from me.
Representative Leach, do you yield?
I yield. We'll go for a while.
All right,
Yes.
thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Leach, I remember the original language of this bill had the phrasing messaging for education, awareness, and prevention messaging. Now, your amendment changes that a little bit, messaging on the dangers of marijuana in order to prevent marijuana use in youth. Do you think that this amendment addresses the criteria that we must be furthering in the intent of the initiative? Is that still going to be a problem even with your amendment?
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Freeze, yes.
So, Mr. Chair, Mr. Leach, so it's still going to be a problem?
No.
Representative Leach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question that I'm answering is, do I think it furthers the proposition? That's the question, and I had said my response was yes.
Representative Freeze.
Thank you. I would just like to make a comment.
Yes, proceed.
Mr. Chair, members, I'd just like to highlight that I believe that even with the amendment, we don't meet that bar of furthering the intent of the initiative, because the initiative is for medical marijuana, and if you're using medical marijuana under the direction of a physician and the guidance of someone, a physician, a nurse practitioner, some healthcare provider who is prescribing that to you, then the dangers should be quite minimal, as Representative Powers Hanley has suggested. And I also want to comment on the in the use of marijuana as in combustion, as Mr. Leach and Mr. Fincham have mentioned, or it was the discussion. Someone mentioned it. I think Mr. Fincham as well. There's other ways to ingest marijuana. It doesn't have to be through combustion. You can aerosolize. You can ingest it with a capsule. You can ingest it in certain food items. So there are safer ways to ingest marijuana for the benefits in its medical use. So I just want to say that that argument may have some holes in it. Anyway, I do still have some concerns that this, even with the amendment, we aren't furthering the intent of the measure, and for those reasons, I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Leach, closing comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My only closing comment is that I have the latest, the December report from Department of Health Services, and yes, the good doctor is correct. There are other forms of ingestion. I would argue that basically 130 ounces of marijuana in the reporting period were consumed by ignition, by smoking, and 6,000 were ingested by edible means. And so there are other ways. I acknowledge that. But to the point, for those that may have a question on whether or not it furthers the proposition, I would remind you that the proposition was silent on the question of spending these funds, and that is problematic, because right now we are looking, and the genesis of this bill was because DHS is not clear on how they can proceed, and that's why they are not spending any money. And so this bill was a combination of industry and pro and con, as well as DHS coming to us and give us further guidance in statute. So with that, I look forward to your support. I particularly look forward to your support when it comes to the floor, because we do need 45 votes, and I think the message to send to our society is that we want to address this and take care of this. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Lawrence, you're on my board, but you can only ask questions pertaining to his closing comments at this
Would
point.
Mr. Leach yield to a question?
Representative Leach, do you yield?
I will yield to a question before 5.
He yields.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you agree that we were discussing the newspaper article dealing with the state of Arizona and deaths in the state of Arizona from the use of marijuana? Would you agree that's what Mrs. Powers Handley talked about?
Mr. Chairman,
Leach.
Mr. Lawrence, not in the first presentation of what she said, but certainly in the second point, and she's nodding. That I don't know if that was a clarification, a misstatement, or what. I'm not going to prejudge, or I'm not going to judge what that comment was, but I understand in her last comment that no one in Arizona.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Lawrence.
Mr. Leach,
Representative Lawrence, I would just caution you that it has to be pertaining to his closing comments, what he just said a minute ago, the question, with all due respect. The last one was borderline.
Neither one of us can remember, Mr. Chairman.
right.
I'm also trying to let Representative Leach off the hook here.
My next question would leap across that border. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Members, the question before you, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question before you is when the Committee of the Whole Rise Report gives House Bill 2066 as amended a do pass recommendation. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Appears the ayes have it, do have it, so ordered. Clerk will read the next bill on the calendar along with committee recommendations.
House Bill 2068, Mr. Speaker, your committee on Judiciary, Public Safety, and consideration. House Bill 2068 and recommends the bill to pass. Mr. Speaker, may now rules under consideration. House Bill 2068 and says the bill is constitutional, proper, and form.
Chair recognizes Representative Leach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the Committee of the Whole Rise report, it recommends that HB 2068 receive a due pass.
Okay. Members, is there any further discussion? Representative Leach. Oh, the chair recognizes Representative Powers Handler. I know. Sorry, I was
Chair?
too short. Yes, please proceed.
Yes. I rise to make a comment.
Yes, please.
You're off the hook. No questions. This bill, if I read it correctly, says that it would be unlawful for people to use medical marijuana if they were on probation, parole, or doing community service for a drug offense or a DUI. And so, as I said in my earlier comments regarding medical marijuana, I did teach health education and addiction at the university level and the community college level, and we went through alcoholism and all sorts of drug addiction. And I would suggest that medical marijuana could actually help somebody get beyond another type of drug addiction, for example, alcoholism or opioid addiction. And so I think this is counterproductive to not allow medical marijuana patients to use the medicine that they are legally allowed to have. And I do think that it would help them get off other drugs and help them get off of alcohol, or at least help them deal with those issues. So thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Blunt.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I rise to make a comment.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. So I do have serious concerns about this because we are going to impact the lives of many people, including veterans. In fact, this morning I was talking to a veteran who is suffering from PTSD and does in fact use medical marijuana to help him alleviate his post-traumatic stress. That's number one. But then also, again, we are always trying to address the concerns of veterans who are suffering from alcoholism, maybe drug addiction, due to their time in service. And unfortunately, as many of you know, often veterans may come in contact with the law because they made the mistake of getting in their vehicle and driving, or they made the mistake of getting into a fight which resulted in an arrest. And so we are taking away a tool for veterans to have access to medical marijuana that will help them alleviate things like post-traumatic stress, to help them alleviate the pain that they suffer during or that the pain that they're suffering because of an accident or because they are victim to, to damage. In fact, I have a cousin who was downed in Afghanistan, and he lost the use of his legs, and he's struggling. So I think of people like my cousin who may have to rely on other forms of dealing with their post-traumatic stress, with their pain. And so what I urge you all here is to think about how we are negatively impacting the lives of many of our veterans that have no other options and have unfortunately come into contact with the law because they lack the resources. And so this is really going to have a negative impact. And I'm thinking of that veteran that I spoke with this morning who wanted to give his testimony in committee and who does in fact have a nonprofit. And he realized as we were talking that he has not, along with many veterans, really brought their voices to the table. And I know that's something he's going to certainly try to do moving forward. But I just want to really remind all of us that when we're creating laws, we may not have or understand the full impact that we're having on all community members, especially our veterans. So I encourage you guys to please oppose this so veterans have options to deal with their post-traumatic stress, to deal with their pain, so they don't continue to fall prey to our system. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Epstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I rise with a question for the sponsor, if he will yield.
A question for who?
Mr. Leach.
Okay, Representative Leach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is after 5. This is going in the overtime column, but I do yield.
He yields.
With much appreciation. It's simple. Are there any other drugs that we prohibit parolees or those on probation from having access to? So do we prohibit them from having access to opioids? Do we prohibit them from, is this going to be added to a list, or is this just the first one that we will not allow? Is this the first medicine that we will not allow parolees and so on to have access to?
Representative Leach.
Mr. Chairman, I know I cannot answer a question with a question, but is the question other drugs, or is the question other medicines?
Representative Epstein.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I guess since it is medical marijuana, I could say I mean other medicines.
Representative Leach.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Epstein, for the clarification. If it was other drugs, we don't allow, as alcohol is a drug, we don't allow alcoholics that are under a court order or Department of Corrections to certainly use use alcohol. When it comes to medicine, I can tell you that if you're in the order of the court, if you're on, let me get this straight, if you're in the order of the court on probation, the court will make the decision on medications. Now, certainly, and if you're in parole, that is up to the Department of Corrections. So certainly that is reviewed. It does not take it away from them, but that is reviewed. If that is needed, if a drug is needed, whether it be something for high blood pressure, whether it be something for cholesterol, whether it be medical marijuana, whether it be whatever drug it may be, that would be when you're admitted or on parole, and you have to submit to either blood tests on the street or be in prisons. So, yes.
Representative Epstein. Okay. Representative Martinez.
Mr. Chair, can I comment on the bill?
Yes, please do.
Right now, we have 2,500 veterans that are incarcerated in the Department of Corrections. We have a special unit for vets at East Unit in Florence and Wilmot and Tucson. The Veterans Administration already, looking at this issue because veterans that have suffered post-traumatic stress syndrome are already have medical marijuana cards, and they're dealing with their issues with the treatment of medical marijuana. So I asked my colleagues to think about this because, I've been a parole officer, okay? I was a parole officer for 10 years. But, the point I'm trying to make is that at some point in time, even the Department of Corrections is going to have to deal with this issue when it comes to veterans. And I asked my colleagues, please keep veterans in your mind because basically there's 600,000 of them here in Arizona. And if we're going to tell veterans that they're not going to be able to use medical marijuana when they're dealing with some severe post-traumatic stress syndrome issues, then I think that's something for us to think about. This is not an easy issue. But I don't believe that this bill, the way it's crafted, that it was well thought out. It doesn't address anything about veterans. And so I just want to leave all my colleagues with that. Thank you.
Representative Leach, closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to ask the members to allow me to clear something up that has been said several times on the floor. And if you look at the bill, if you look at Section J, lines 18 to 23, and the key words here, and I quote, it goes through the offenses and what can happen in conviction, one thing or the other, may be prohibited. May be prohibited. It doesn't say that veterans, it doesn't say that people with chronic pain, it doesn't say people with PTSD, it does not say that they will not. It says they may. And that's why I made the reference to an earlier question about the courts and about DOC, because that will be reviewed. And when that is reviewed, the courts or DOC will take under consideration, as they do, medical concerns. And so this bill, contrary to what's been said on the floor here several times, does not automatically remove this medicine, medical marijuana, from the repertoire of drugs that can be given to patients in need. With that, once again, I ask you for your support of this bill. I particularly ask for support of this bill when it goes to the vote. This is voter protected. This is a strengthening of the proposition, and I think we would do well to give our support to this bill. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Blanc, you're on my board, so you have a question on closing comments?
Thank you so much, Chairman, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a comment based on his closing.
I'm sorry. So those are his closing comments. So you can only do a question, I believe.
Okay, I'm happy to do a question, if I may. I thought I could do a comment, though, based on his closing comment.
1 second, please. Okay, yes, actually, if you want to ask Representative Leach and he yields to a question on his closing comments, that's what's allowed.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Do you yield, Representative Leach?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Blanc, you know I'm going to yield.
He yields.
Thank you so much. Representative Leach, thank you very much for yielding, but I do have concerns because in this, you did highlight may be prohibited from possessing or using medical marijuana, but what I'm concerned about is it specifically says a registered qualifying patient who is serving a term of probation, community supervision, or parole pursuant to a conviction or any adjudication for an offense included in Title 8, Chapter 3, yada yada, may be prohibited from possessing or using medical marijuana. And I think you're right. There is a may be prohibited, but there's all of these other factors that can negatively impact all people, including veterans. I mean, so I guess I'm concerned because I know you're,
Representative
yeah, I
Block,
know.
we're
I'm
gonna have
sorry.
to get to a question.
Thank you. I don't think you can disqualify it. So I'm trying to figure out why you think it can be disqualified, that somehow veterans will be looked at differently in a system that criminalizes people, regardless of, in some cases, their
Representative
past.
Block, I'm sorry, we have to get.
Thank you. That was my question, I guess. Go how you would like. Thank you, Representative Leach. Thank you.
Representative Leach,
I will, Mr. Chairman, I will respond, and I think I heard a question there someplace, so
proceed.
I'll try to. This bill is not to single out veterans. It's not to single out PTSD. It's not to single out anybody that has committed a crime. This bill is people that have a card for medical marijuana, and when they are on that medical marijuana program, when they go before the body that controls either the supervision, whether it controls the parole, the probation, everything that you said, Ms. Blanc, will be taken into consideration. That's why we left it the way it is. It will be under consideration. And if that person, male, female, lieutenant colonel, buck private, whatever it is, walks in there and has a situation where they ended up on parole or probation, they have a card, they have been using that will all be part of the process before the, I want to say adjudicating, but it might not be not be them, it could be the courts, it could be DOC, or whoever is governing that type of supervision. So please, Mr. Chairman, forgive me for belaboring the point that the may is key to this, and while it's only a three-letter word, it's very important in this bill. And once again, I ask for your support.
Okay, members, the question before you is when the Committee of the Whole rises report, it gives House Bill 2068 a do-pass recommendation. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Appears the ayes have it, do have it, so ordered. Clerk will read the next